The Civil War was the greatest calamity to happen to the United States. Over 600,000 killed in that war, more than all other wars combined for America. It ended slavery and it ended the secession of the southern states called the Confederacy. The most momentous crisis in American history. I truly think tomorrow's election and the stark contrast offered by Donald Trump and Joe Biden is the most serious choice with the most serious ramifications for America in 160 years. I really believe that. In fact, I think there's actually a possibility for an informal civil war in America, not a war between the states, but a wave of mass political violence in the streets. It's not even a prediction, it's an observation of how the Democrat street gangs like Antifa and Black Lives Matter have conducted themselves in the past 6 months. I see that shopkeepers in Washington, D.C. have begun boarding up their windows again. They're not worried about riots from Republicans. There are no Republicans in Washington. But don't worry, all the Democrat celebrities who support Democrat rioters, call for the defunding of police, they'll have plenty of private security. America has had crises since the Civil War, whether to get involved in the Second World War, for example. Isolationists won the argument for 2 years after Hitler attacked the world. That ended when Germany's ally Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. It was a disaster and a calamity, but it actually unified America. After Pearl Harbor, every American was fused together in a sense of shared national purpose. The Cold War that followed was a test for America too. But again, there was a general agreement between Republicans and Democrats about foreign policy. It was John F. Kennedy, the Democrat, who contained Cuba, actually backed an attempt to invade it. Democrats love fighting wars, probably a little bit too much. My point is that disagreements between Republican politicians and Democrat politicians and their voter bases have been reasonable and incremental most of the time, but that's come apart. Over the past 2 decades, divisions in America have increased. There isn't much of a center anymore. There's not a lot of common ground anymore. Look at these graphs from Pew Research. The country's coming apart, I think. Coming Apart, that's the title of a book published almost 10 years ago by the great scholar Charles Murray. He describes many changes in America, including a growing white underclass and how elites in places like Manhattan and Silicon Valley have so little to do with small town or rural or Christian America anymore. It's like they're living in a bubble. PBS interviewed Murray and they published a little quiz online that you can take, and I really recommend you do it. Do you live in a bubble is their quiz. There exists a new upper class that's completely disconnected from the average white American and American culture at large, argues Charles Murray. Questions like, have you ever lived for at least a year in a community, an American community, with a population under 50,000 that is not part of a metropolitan area and is not where you went to college? So have you ever spent a year in a small town? Have you ever walked on a factory floor? That's my favorite by far. Have you ever had a close friend who was an evangelical Christian? And this one, which was so prescient for cancel culture, do you now have a close friend with whom you have strong and wide-ranging political disagreements? There are questions about what restaurants you go to and what movies you watch. Some of them are surprising for fancy big city pundits to read. They're not IQ tests. There's actually no right or wrong answer. It's not an ideological test. It's just testing. Do you know how people in the other places live, how the other half lives, how they think? It's not an IQ test. There's no right or wrong. It's just, do you know? Trump has a massive rally. Well, he's having a bunch of them. He had one over the weekend in a place called Butler, Pennsylvania. Small town, lots of blue-collar workers working in fracking. Used to be some steel jobs there. It's over 90% white. Average income is $25,000 a year. You heard that right, 25. Look at the size of the Trump rally there in Butler. I've read some reports that put it over 50,000 people. Obviously, people came in from far away, probably Pittsburgh nearby. That's one part of America. Their steel jobs went to China. Fracking is what gives them some work now. They're not obsessed with what your pronouns are or transgender rights. They're not interested in pleasing the United Nations global warming diplomats, and they're probably not interested in ever fighting a forever war in Afghanistan. So that's one half of the country that Charles Murray talks about. They know that open borders immigration drives down wages. They've been hit hard by opioid drugs from China. I think they care about China. I think Trump's messages like this works. Here's a 1-minute ad. I think this works.
ABC News investigation this morning into Joe Biden's son Hunter and questions about money he made from foreign business dealings while his father was vice president.
And did Joe Biden allow it? We're talking about millions of dollars in at least 2 countries.
Did you talk about China or your deal with China?
No.
A 12-hour flight over?
No, of course not.
That never came up. No.
Less than 2 weeks after that trip, BHR Partners was launched, a private equity firm funded in part by Chinese banks.
He has come forward and said it was a mistake on his part to be on the board.
My son's business dealings were not anything with everybody that he's talking about.
What's your understanding of what your son was doing for an extraordinary amount of money?
I don't know what he was doing. I know he was on the board.
Hunter Biden holds an equity stake in a company that's taken over $1.5 billion in loans from the Chinese government. This is obviously an issue.
What they said is China would prefer Joe Biden.
China and Iran.
China and Iran.
China and Iran want to see Donald Trump's defeat, and they're looking for ways to make that happen.
China's a great nation, and we should hope for the continued expansion.
Growth of China is overwhelmingly in our interest.
And there's much more to come.
And now the steel mill ain't even there.
I think that connects, which is why the mainstream media absolutely censored the massive scandal of Biden's son, Hunter Biden, taking millions from China and millions from Russia and other foreign countries, while Biden himself was vice president dealing with those same countries. Hunter Biden is a dissolute, drug-addicted ne'er-do-well, always in trouble, bizarre moral choices that I will not get into here, absolutely unemployable, but all of these foreign countries were hiring him for millions of dollars. What were they paying him for? Well, here's a hint.
I remember going over convincing our team, or others too, convincing us that we should be providing for loan guarantees. And I went over for, I guess, the 12th, 13th time to Kyiv, and I was supposed to announce that there was another $1 billion loan guarantee. And I had gotten a commitment from Poroshenko and from Yatsenyuk that they would take action against the state prosecutor, and they didn't. So they said they were walking out to press conference. I said, no, I said, we're not going to give you the $1 billion. They said, you have no authority. You're not the president. The president said. I said, call him. I said, I'm telling you, you're not getting the $1 billion. I said, you're not getting the $1 billion. I'm going to be leaving here. And I think it was, 6 hours? I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Well, son of a bitch. Got fired. And they put in place someone who was solid.
Yeah, that's what Hunter Biden was hired for. You've heard the phrase honey trap, right? Basically a way to entrap someone, to compromise them, usually using sex, but you could extort someone over almost anything. Hunter Biden is the Winnie the Pooh when it comes to honey traps. I mean, seriously, why on earth would the wife of the former mayor of Moscow wire him $3.5 million? It's not even the corruption. It's that Hunter Biden and Joe Biden, it's not the grift, it's not the immorality, it's not even the security risk. It's that Joe Biden would obviously sell out the people of Butler, Pennsylvania to China for $1. They're not fighting for the people of Butler. I think it's true to say that Trump is belligerent and aggressive and bellicose and offensive and feisty, but I think it's in the service of people like those in Butler. I don't know how rich Trump is, whether he's worth a few $100 million or $1 billion or $10 billion, I don't know, whatever, but it's clear that he's not doing this for the cash. It's absolutely unthinkable that Joe Biden would decline to take the president's salary. Trump donates his salary to a different charity every quarter. What does Trump fight for? Why is he in it? He had fame and fortune and influence. Whether you agree with him or disagree with him, he's deploying his personal and political capital to certain very clear public outcomes. Tax cuts, reviving oil and gas for economic reasons and also to make America energy independent, not getting into foreign entanglements, checking the power of China militarily and politically and economically. I mean, all the masters of the universe, all the big bosses hate Trump for putting tariffs on China. Of course they do. They want to use cheap Chinese factories instead of hiring people in Butler, Pennsylvania. That's an excerpt from my daily show, The Ezra Levant Show. Every day I do a monologue on the news of the day, then I interview an interesting guest, and then I read my hate mail. You gotta subscribe. Go to rebelnews.com.